Have you heard of the death curse of the U.S. presidents? Every 20 years, a U.S. president dies during his term in office. Without meeting a natural end, this was a curse laid by a tribal chief, when the U.S. massacred Native Americans, and from then on, America's misfortune began. How did the cursed presidents meet their ends in the streets? Who exactly were the assassins that killed them? Why did the Native American curse suddenly take effect? Follow the editor. And in this episode, I'll tell you about the U.S. presidents who died unnatural deaths. As the most imaginative president in U.S. history, Kennedy's biggest regret in life was turning his car into a convertible. On November 22, 1963, the 35th President of the United States, Kennedy, along with his wife, met their fate. While visiting Texas, to appear more approachable and to show off his beautiful wife, Kennedy specifically had the roof of the car removed during the parade, just as he was happily greeting the cheering crowds. A bullet pierced precisely through his throat. Before anyone could react, a second shot blew off the top of his skull. Kennedy died instantly. The First Lady, Jacqueline, was so terrified that she crawled to the back of the car, trying to retrieve fragments of her husband's skull. The assassination shocked the world instantly. Who could it have been that dared to shoot the president in broad daylight? US police worked with astounding speed. Less than 10 minutes after Kennedy was confirmed dead, the killer was caught. The suspect, named Harvey, had served in the U.S. Marine Corps and was known as a sharpshooter. A reputation, it seemed the case would be closed quickly. But just as the police were preparing to interrogate him, Harvey suddenly shouted, "I'm just a scapegoat." Then, under the gaze of dozens of officers and during a live global broadcast, he was shot dead. It was clearly a premeditated crime, and more than one person was involved. Because of this, the newly 36th President, Johnson, personally appointed a special Warren Commission to thoroughly investigate Kennedy's murder. The commission soon made a startling discovery. There was no presidential DNA on the bullet. It had been cleaned. Even Kennedy's convertible was quickly washed clean. The glass and other parts were replaced. Could there be a mole inside the investigation team? Even stranger. In the 3 years following the assassination, 18 key witnesses died, one after another. Some shot, some stabbed. Even over a decade later, more witnesses continued to die mysteriously. Car crashes, plane crashes, falls from buildings, totaling as many as 103 people. Despite the layers of mystery, the commission still publicly announced that the president's assassination was solely the act of Harvey. Go ask Kennedy if he believed that. After the strange assassination of the president, the government's findings failed to convince the public. This sparked heated debates across America. Some say Kennedy had offended U.S. arms dealers and Wall Street capitalists. Those years, not only Kennedy died, several of his family members were also killed. This is the famous Kennedy family curse. Others say it was done by Marilyn Monroe's fans. Back then, Kennedy was caught in a scandal with Monroe. A year after Monroe's mysterious death, Kennedy was shot in the head. It's hard not to make the connection. So, what do you think about this, folks? Of course, there were presidents who died even more tragically than Kennedy, the greatest president in U.S. history, Abraham Lincoln. During his presidency, he completed the emancipation of slaves, ended the Civil War, and achieved other major milestones, earning the deep love of the people. He could never have imagined that he would die at the hands of an actor. The man who assassinated Lincoln was a stage actor named John Booth. His reason for killing the president was absurd. He simply wanted to be famous. As everyone knows, the Northern Union won the American Civil War. John felt that when he performed, Southern audiences were warmer than Northern ones, so he suddenly had an evil idea. If I kill the president, the Southern people will see me as a hero, and I'll be famous overnight. I'll instantly become a star. Such twisted thinking really was bizarre. He never considered the consequences of assassinating the president. He just did it. On the evening of April 14, 1865, Lincoln was invited to see a play at Ford's Theater in Washington. When the play reached its climax, John quietly slipped into the box, put a gun to the back of the president's head, and fired. President Lincoln died instantly. The entire theater was thrown into chaos. John seized the moment to rush out the door and rode south on a horse he had prepared in advance. His heart was pounding with excitement, thinking he had avenged the Southern people and would soon be hailed as a hero. What he didn't expect was that the whole country had begun hunting him down. Anyone daring to hide a fugitive would be signing their own death warrant. John and his accomplice were turned away everywhere and had to hide in a barn on a farm. When the police searched the area, the farmer immediately revealed the fugitive's location. John's dream of heroism was shattered. In desperation, he refused to leave the barn. The search party set the entire barn ablaze. John was nearly roasted alive. He crawled out, rolling on the ground, only to be shot dead by the police. His accomplices were soon executed as well. That was the entire process of Lincoln's assassination. Some say this story is far too ridiculous. There must have been a bigger conspiracy, and it could not have been just lone actors doing. Unfortunately, so much time has passed that the truth can no longer be traced. But that's not all. More than 20 years after Lincoln's death, another president, named Garfield, also met with misfortune. The cause of his death was even stranger. The 20th president of the United States, Garfield, had been in office less than 4 months when he tragically fell to the gun of a down-and-out lawyer. This lawyer was named Guy. His professional skills were poor, and he couldn't get a single case. He would often write letters to the White House, saying he could barely afford to eat, and begging the president to appoint him as consul to Paris. Garfield could only respond helplessly that in his life, he had never seen such a request. Unexpectedly, Guiteau held a grudge. He learned that some Republicans were unhappy with Garfield, so he worked up the courage to think of killing the president, believing Republicans would be grateful to him and reward him with a good job. On July 2, 1881, Garfield went to the train station on official business. Guiteau slipped behind the president and fired twice. Afterward, he didn't even run. He waved his arms and shouted, "Now it's settled. They'll definitely give me a position." Clearly, this man's mental state was unstable. After Guiteau was executed, part of his brain was removed and taken to Philadelphia for study. It seems even Americans couldn't understand what kind of brain could produce such bizarre ideas. Today, that part of his brain is still on display in a Philadelphia museum. Interested visitors can still go and see it. As for the unlucky President Garfield, although he was shot twice, the bullets didn't hit any vital organs. He wouldn't have died originally. Who would have thought that in his lifetime, due to nervousness, they didn't wash their hands or disinfect, and directly stuck their fingers into the wound to dig out the bullet? Not only did the bullet remain, but the wound also became infected. In the following weeks, Garfield's wound festered and worsened. He was half dead, and eventually, due to inflammation and infection, Garfield passed away. 20 years later, the terrifying curse struck again. This time, it was the 25th President of the United States, William McKinley. McKinley was an ardent expansionist. During his term, he launched the Spanish-American War, defeating Spain's naval power, and even encouraged foreign powers to implement the open-door policy in China. He sent troops to join the Eight-Nation Alliance and plundered China on a large scale. Naturally, such a man would not meet a good end. On September 6, 1901, McKinley was attending an exposition in New York when a man named Cholgos shot him on the spot. The assassin Cholgos said he killed the president because he was a vile capitalist and an enemy of the people. Cholgos was later sentenced and tortured to death. These 4 men were the U.S. presidents who have been assassinated and killed in office. Other presidents, although not assassinated, also met unfortunate ends. We can summarize. In 1841, Harrison was elected the 9th president and died of pneumonia during his term. Lincoln was elected the 16th president and was assassinated during his term. Garfield was elected the 20th president and was assassinated during his term. In 1901, the 25th president, McKinley, was assassinated during his term. Harding was elected the 29th president and died in office. The cause remains a mystery. Roosevelt Roosevelt was elected the 32nd and 33rd president and died of a sudden cerebral hemorrhage during his term. In 1961, Kennedy was elected the 35th president and was assassinated in office until the 40th president, Ronald Reagan, took office. After surviving an assassination attempt, he even broke this terrifying curse. How exactly did he manage that? Ronald Reagan became president in 1980, less than 60 days after taking office, while at the Hilton Hotel in Washington. He had just finished giving a speech and was speaking to a group of reporters when, unexpectedly, a mentally ill man slipped into the crowd. He fired 6 shots at the president, hitting Reagan, his secretary, and his bodyguards. The bullet that hit President Reagan was only an inch away from his heart. That 1 inch saved Reagan's life. After the assassination attempt, First Lady Nancy was extremely frightened. It is said she used every connection and paid a high price to invite 3 elderly Native American shamans to the White House for a grand ritual. To ward off disaster for Reagan, they gave it their all and supposedly broke Tecumseh's curse. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But what's certain is that from then on, President Reagan remained safe until the end of his term, and every president after him has been fine as well. By this point in the story, things start to sound almost magical. Is the so-called Tecumseh curse really a thing? Perhaps these events that seem like a curse are merely coincidences. The real cause of U.S. presidents meeting untimely ends may still lie in America's national condition. As American historians have said, every U.S. frontier was gained through a series of wars against Native Americans, massacres, and cultural eradication. The history of America's development is a history of Native American blood and tears. If you understand what Americans did back then, you wouldn't think that these assassinated U.S. presidents died in vain. The first inhabitants of the American continent were ancient Native American peoples. They lived in tribes for a long time, with no concept of a nation. In 1620, a British sailing ship called the Mayflower carried 102 pilgrims to this isolated continent of the Americas. Not long after, these uninvited guests were driven to the brink of death by the cold weather and lack of food. Half of them did not survive the first winter. At that time, the Native Americans extended a helping hand. They brought food to these European settlers, taught them how to fish at sea, farm on land, and avoid wild animals. With the Native Americans' full guidance and generosity, these Europeans finally survived. The following year, during the harvest season, they held a celebration. That day was later designated by Americans as an important traditional holiday, Thanksgiving. However, they gave thanks not to the Native Americans, but to God. Yes, you heard that right, they thanked God for the precious food. As more Europeans immigrated, conflicts over land broke out with the native inhabitants. The white colonists did not hesitate to pick up weapons and pull the trigger on those same Native Americans who had once helped them. The unarmed, cannonless natives had no power to resist. The able-bodied were taken as slaves, and the elderly and children were executed. Worse still, the colonists once again held Thanksgiving. This time, besides feasting, they used Native American heads as footballs in kicking games. In 1783, Britain officially recognized US independence. From then on, Native Americans fell into total despair. After independence, the United States carried out over 1,500 brutal massacres of Native Americans. In 1703, there was even a law stating that anyone bringing in a Native American scalp could claim a bounty. They claimed that slaughter and scalping were gods and nature's ways of dealing with these people. In 1520, Florida had 700,000 indigenous people. By 1700, fewer than 2,000 remained. Tribes such as the Pequots, Mohicans, Massachusetts, and Wampanoags, over a dozen in total, were wiped out. It was a complete physical genocide. By the late 19th century, the U.S. government began a cultural genocide of indigenous peoples. They claimed that Native Americans were a barbaric, evil, and inferior race that needed American help to be civilized. Statistics show that by 1976, about 70,000 Native American women were forcibly sterilized. The U.S. government also introduced a forced foster policy, removing Native American children from their families to be raised by white families, erasing their language, culture, and identity entirely. Today, across the vast American continent, only 300 Native American reservations remain, scattered in remote areas of the U.S., the survival of these reservations is not due to U.S. government mercy, but to the centuries of fierce resistance by Native Americans. Of course, they still face discrimination, with poverty and unemployment rates consistently among the highest, far behind those of white Americans. The United States often calls itself the beacon of liberty and loudly proclaims unalienable rights. But how many Americans remember the atrocities they committed against the native peoples of this land? How many American families on Thanksgiving Day remember the Native Americans who once saved their ancestors' lives? They still live on this land, but it no longer belongs to them. Perhaps the so-called Tecumseh curse is a reminder to the world